Alex O'Connor, we've got unfinished business.
I believe so.
Yeah, so we had a lovely little chat recently on your channel about heretical Christianity just before Christmas. And it was all really lovely, but just one little thing you said triggered me. And I was thinking, should I respond? But I thought I had a sense that if I responded, we'd get stuck down a 3-hour rabbit hole and get completely off topic. So I let it go. But, you know, Alex, I find it hard to let things go. And this has sort of been bothering me. You basically ruined my Christmas. So I thought I'd invite you on to my thing to have a little chat about it. Thanks for taking me up. Is that all right?
That sounds great. Yeah, thanks for having me on the other way around. It's nice to do this. I think this is the first time this has happened. I mean, we've spoken a few times in public forums, but never with you as host.
Yeah, it's all a new thing, really. I'm still getting used to it. I've done so many interviews that I'm sort of don't get nervous anymore. But suddenly when I'm in charge, I don't like being in charge, you know, and I'm sort of like, oh, I'm going to mess it up. But anyway.
Yeah, it changes the game, but I'm sure you'll do just fine.
Well, this is all just a huge indulgence for me anyway. But yeah, so the sentence in particular that triggered me, if that's the right word, which it probably isn't, is you said, if I'm remembering rightly, that pain is defined as a state you don't want to be in, and pleasure is defined as a state you do want to be in. Can you recall those statements?
I often say this, and I think it's helpful in the context of, you know, when you talk about pleasure in terms of utilitarianism or Epicureanism or something, and sometimes people think that pleasure just means like, you know, drinking and partying and stuff like that. And a lot of philosophers want to say, no, it's something more specific and subtle. It's not just the sort of the casual, trivial pleasures. It's also the pleasures of, you know, friendship and virtue and all of this kind of stuff. All of the sort of the good stuff. And I found that the most helpful way, and also I also want to capture the really trivial stuff. Like when you're really doing a utilitarian calculus, you need to add up things like, you know, the pain of walking up the stairs. Because, you know, oh, who cares? It's only walking up the stairs. But technically, it's an exertion, right? And so I say that broadly defined, at least the way that I use the terms, pleasure is just any experience which is wanted when it's being experienced, and pain is any experience which is not wanted when it's being experienced. And I think that's a pretty sort of serviceable definition of pleasure and pain, but from the sounds of things, you've got a bone to pick.
Right, so you want to bring it in sort of more nuanced forms of pleasure, not just the kind of, sort of sugar high, but more subtle forms of pleasure and pain that are all part of what you mean. I suppose what I was thinking about this, and what was bothering me was, I'm thinking you're a Qualia realist, right? You're sort of, in terms of consciousness, we're on the same team, and it's been quite gratifying actually to see you gravitating towards essentially the correct position on consciousness. And I'm just worried, like, well, we can clarify how we're understanding both of these terms, pleasure and want or desire, but is there a tension with the Qualia realism, with that statement? And then the more I thought about it, so we can get on to this, maybe there's a tension between your view on consciousness and your view on meta-ethics, your view on foundational issues of the morality. Anyway, okay, so let's just start in with this potential clash with the Qualia realism. So, right, if you're a Qualia realist, right, pain, how do we define pain? Well, it's just defined by how it feels. And, you know, famously, you can't say anything more than that. You know, as Louis Armstrong said, you know, if you have to ask, you'll never know about jazz. He said, you know, what's jazz? He said, if you have to ask, you'll never. So what is pain? You know, you can't convey it to someone who hasn't felt it. You feel it and you attend to it. You know how it feels. That's it, right? Whereas, what about desire? I'm taking the word want is picking out desire. Typically, at least, and I'm interested to hear how you're thinking of that word. Typically, in analytic philosophy, that's defined more behaviorally, right? So if you desire cake, for example, that means you're sort of dispositionally set up to seek out cake whenever you can, or in the relevant circumstances, right? So we've got on the one hand pain defined in terms of how it feels, on the other hand desire defined sort of behaviorally. Now, if you're a qualia realist, kind of the essence of qualia realism is these are sort of conceptually distinct, right? To make it vivid, you can conceive of zombies who, so a zombie, a philosophical zombie who is behaviorally just like us, right? But doesn't have any feelings. There's nothing that it's like to be a zombie. So we could have a zombie who desires cake in the sense that they're dispositionally set up to seek out cake as much as they can and cram it in their mouth, but doesn't have any feelings, doesn't have any pleasure. So that's the worry. So are you, when you're defining pain in terms of desire, are you undermining that, the conceivability of zombies, undermining the essence of qualia realism? I thought you were on the right side. I'm worried.
Well, there are a few things to say. One is that, I'm like a leaf blowing in the wind when it comes to philosophical positions, at least over the long term. God knows what I will believe in 2 minutes from now, let alone 2 years. I don't know how committed I am to, so this term qualia realism, I'd want to unpack exactly what you mean by that and what it entails, because I believe in qualia, but in a specific and limited sense. So maybe it's worth unpacking what that means. But the most interesting thing for me is this definition of desire. And you say, well, to desire something is kind of to be behaviorally predisposed towards getting it. But for the reasons you've just given, I think that's not a very good way of thinking about desire, right? And I can imagine, for example, some kind of locked-in consciousness, some kind of, imagine someone with locked-in syndrome, literally, like somebody whose brain is active and they have a sort of inner experience, but their entire body is paralyzed. They can't communicate with the outside world. They can't move their body at all. I would imagine that if you woke one of those people up and you said, when you were experiencing that, what was it like? They'd say, oh, I just desired that it would come to an end. I just had this really strong desire that I wasn't locked in. But I kind of want to say they can't be behaviorally predisposed to moving in a particular direction if they're completely paralyzed and unable to move anything except for their sort of internal mental state. And yet I think it makes sense to say that they desire something. So I think desire is not a behaviorally defined experience. I think that desire is kind of, it's sort of synonymous with preference, in that you essentially need the ability to well, I think you need to, I don't know, maybe I'm tying myself up in knots here. This will be fun to explore, because I want to say in order to desire something, you need to be able to hold two situations in mind. You need to be able to consider one option and another, and then sort of evaluate which of those you prefer, which of those is better, right? But then the thing is, I feel like you could be in pain even if you didn't know there were any other options. Do you know what I mean? I feel like you could be in pain, and yet not know that there's some other option where you're not in pain, which implies to me that maybe we can separate out these concepts. But I do think as long as you have desires, as long as you have the capability to desire certain things and not others, then maybe it's not that, it might not be that all undesirable states are painful, but that all painful states are undesirable. I mean, would you agree with that let's not use the word definition, but that supposition that it's impossible to have a painful state which is desired when it's being experienced? And I don't mean instrumentally desired. I don't mean well, I'm in pain when I'm at the gym, but I'm doing it because I want to be healthy. Sure. Because it's still they say no pain, no gain, right? It still is pain in that instance. It might just be a pain that's worth it, but it's still pain, in which case I want to say it's not possible to have a pain which is desired in itself, for itself, when being experienced. And even if it's not on a definitional point, do you agree with that?
that's a good question. Let's just pause to hone in a little bit on how we're understanding desire. Then, so you're saying you want to distinguish desire from behavior. I mean, could we perhaps say that there's two notions here, right? There is maybe an experiential notion of desire where it's like, no, and then there's a behavioral notion of desire where you behaviorally set up to get some. Maybe we could call the experiential one yearning, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's take the positive case because it may be a bit simpler. So where you an experiential desire for cake is where you just just yearn for it, right? And sorry, I don't really like cake actually. I'm more of a sort of salt and vinegar crisps kind of guy. Anyway, you're yearning, right? Whereas let's call the behavioral idea here seeking, right? Where you're sort of disposed to seek it out, the kind of thing. So well, to separate them, you could have. I take it you agree with this. Perhaps I'd like to hear what you think. A zombie, right, who has the seeking but not the yearning, right? So they're yearning for cake. Sorry, they're seeking cake, but they're not yearning for it. So are the two notions here? Do you agree? At least there are two notions here,
absolutely.
And they are in principle separable.
I do, but I just don't think that the behavioral version of this. Like I'm happy to use the terms seeking and yearning to be clear about what we mean, but when people typically say desire, I don't think they're talking about seeking. Like I think there are objects in the world which can be behaviorally predisposed to do a particular thing. Like that there are plants that are predisposed to behave in certain ways, and yet people would be reticent to say that they desire to follow the sun across the sky. I mean, panpsychists might be a bit different on this front, but like and on a more sort of with a higher level of certitude, I could say that in like an Aristotelian sense, objects have a sort of tendency to fall towards the ground. They have this behavioral tendency to attract each other, and yet people often ridicule Aristotle, I think, after misunderstanding him and saying that he thought that objects longed to be with the ground. He thought that the reason why objects fell is because that's where they wanted to be, and that's so silly. Well, yeah, of course that's silly. It's because it's not really what Aristotle believed. But that's because we're able to separate out these two ideas of like just what something happens to tend to do, like its behavioral teleology, and then some kind of inner experience where it's some kind of preference that motivates that behavioral tendency. And so, yeah, the philosophical zombie, who knows if these beings are possible or not, but suppose one is, then like, yeah, you've just got, along with loads of other objects in the natural world, some kind of object that just typically behaves in a particular way according to scientific laws or whatever it is. And I would just say in my language that being doesn't have any desires, because I see desire as a sort of a conscious product. But if you'd rather cash that out in terms of yearning and seeking, then fine. I would just then say that suffering is any experience which is not yearned for when experienced, and vice versa,
Good. Okay, so now I'm less worried about your qualia realism, right? We do seem to have. So when you're talking about desire, you're meaning something purely experiential. And at that point, okay, maybe I'm cool with them going together. But now I want to move towards challenging your meta ethics. So I think maybe you've said, Alex, you change your mind a lot, and I think that's a good way to be. But I guess we seem quite aligned on the consciousness stuff, but I'm very much opposed to your current position on meta ethics. I am a strong, robust, Platonic realist. And I'm wondering whether there's some room to push you here. So okay, so you happy at least prima facie at least thinking about zombies that have the seeking, right? We've got our zombie that seeks the cake behaviorally, but doesn't have the yearning. Mm-hmm. But now, okay, so now if we can separate them in that way, then surely it makes sense that they could at least at the level of conceivability, they could be mixed and matched in a funny way, right? So I talked about these odd creatures in my Y book, which has just come out in paperback. A quick advert slipped in there. Thank you. Lost my train of thought now with the advert. Right, so let's take this creature now. Let me introduce you to inverted Ian. Okay, so this creature is not a zombie, but they've got their yearning and their craving sort of mix and match. So inverted Ian seeks out cake, right? Mm-hmm. He behaves in a cake-seeking way, but experientially is horrible, right? It's just disgusting. The thought of it is grim, but that causes inverted Ian to seek. Okay. First question: is that conceivable?
It's conceivable, but only if we imagine your sort of conscious awareness as being this thing which like rides along with your body. I think it almost it like, correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm thinking out loud. What you're talking about kind of sounds to me like it's presupposing dualism, which I know you're not a big fan of, right? Because in order to say that you've got this conscious experience that sort of drives with all of its might, that wishes and wills and tries as hard as it can, that your body does a particular thing and resists, because again, presumably to consciously dislike something behaviorally seems to entail resistance. And so if you're in fact physically not resisting,
I guess that's what I'm questioning.
Yeah, like
I guess I'm saying if you're a qualia realist, I know that's kind of common sense. Lots of things are common sense that are false, like particles aren't conscious. But if you think these things are separable in the zombie case, then why couldn't they be mixed and matched in a funny way? If we can distinguish how it feels and what it does, and that's what I'm saying is kind of the essence of qualia realism. On the one hand, how it feels, on the other hand, what it does. Why couldn't they be mixed and matched in a really bizarre way?
Okay, well, let's see where you're going with this, because I'm thinking imagine like the hiccups, right? Like every time I've had the hiccups, it's been really annoying. And so it's like there's something that my body is doing, like my behavior is doing, that's like predisposed to hiccups. It's like it's tending towards hiccups. It's seeking hiccuping, like literally in a physical sense. That's what my body is doing, and that might seem like weird language, but it's seeking hiccups in the same way that a plant is seeking the sun across the sky, or an object is seeking to fall towards the earth. Right?
Yeah, if we're using it in a behavioural way. Yeah.
So
cool.
yeah. So then, if I've got the hiccups, it means that I'm behaviourally sort of seeking hiccuping, but internally I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm fed up of bloody hiccups, right?
Yeah.
I think that when we have situations like that, we characterize them as being involuntary. And I think it's not that they happen to be involuntary, it's that's what they are. That's how they're characterized. If there's something that your body is doing that you internally are at least not in control of, but definitely in cases where you don't want it to be happening, then it's some kind of involuntary thing. It's like you've got a tic, or you're twitching, or you've got the hiccups, or you sneeze, or whatever. That would have to be the kind of situation that you're describing. And so, for me, the only thing that is like consciously or ethically relevant about, say, hiccups is whether you control them. Right, like I'm never going to morally judge somebody for hiccuping inappropriately, like at the wrong time or something. And I'm not going to consider, if they said, gosh, should I really be hiccuping right now? Is that the right thing for me to do? I'd say that just doesn't make sense as a question. You're placing it in the wrong category of thought because it's not something you're intentionally doing. And I feel like the extent to which inverted Ian seeks one thing, but internally experiences it as horrible and wishes that it didn't occur, is just experiencing a sort of involuntary bodily action, in which case, yeah, it seems perfectly conceivable to me, but it would be best described, I think, as involuntary.
Yeah, really nice example. So it sounds to me like you're imagining what I'm saying as not just dualism, but sort of epiphenomenalism, right? For people who don't know that term, where the consciousness doesn't do anything. It's maybe produced by the brain, but it just sort of hangs around and doesn't do anything. David Chalmers at various points in his career I don't think he's up for epiphenomenalism anymore, but he used to be. Um, quick interlude here. I noticed your recent discussion with Sean Carroll. It was you were surprised that Frank Jackson has changed his mind on the knowledge argument.
Yeah, I didn't know
That
this.
was because it wasn't so much that he thought Sean said, "Oh, because it's a terrible argument." I don't think it wasn't so much he saw a problem with the argument. It was because he thought it led to epiphenomenalism from the start, and he just decided that's just crackers. That's just so it was sort of there must be something
Really?
wrong with the argument because he thought because I think he has this view that what's called the causal closure of the physical, that the physical world forms a causally closed system. Everything we do, behavior, movements of our lips, has a purely physical cause. So if consciousness is non-physical, it must be just epiphenomenal. It must just kind of hang around. And in his initial paper where he defended the knowledge argument, he was an epiphenomenalist. But over time, he just thought. So I was a postdoc at Australian National University with Frank Jackson and David Chalmers, and it's a wonderful university where there are no students, or there are no undergraduate students. So I had many hours of talking to Frank, and I said, "Look, Frank, panpsychism solves this problem. You can come back home." But I didn't persuade him. Anyway, so yeah, it wasn't because he thought this is a terrible argument.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we can talk about the knowledge argument. It might be a bit of a detour now, but there's lots to say about that, and the stuff that someone like Sean Carroll says, I'd love to get your thoughts on. But happy to put a pin in that for now if you like.
Yeah, that was also triggered me. I sit at home watching YouTube, getting triggered. This was not by you this time, but Sean.
Yes.
Yeah, he doesn't understand the knowledge argument. Anyway, let's come back to that. So where are we? So you're interpreting what I'm saying as epiphenomenalism, but I would say no. Why can't it be that it's the disgust with cake that causes him to eat cake all the time? Now that's weird. It's bizarre. But look, if you think these are conceptually, the zombie case shows they're conceptually separate. If you accept that, here's another way of making the point. Right? I think Hume was right. David Hume was right that there's no logical connection between cause and effect.
Yeah, sure.
Right? That you have to do some science to work out what stuff does. There's no contradiction in what was Hume's example? Eating bread causing you to be hungry, or striking a match causing the world to explode. I don't know. We just have to do science to work out what causes what. So, why couldn't it be? Why isn't it at least conceivable that pain, disgust causes you to go for things? Obviously, that's not what the world is like. But what's incoherent about it? Just one more thing. If you're a certain kind of physicalist, I can see how you deny this, namely what's called an analytic functionalist, right? The analytic functionalist, like David Lewis, he had a bit of a nuanced view, very influential late 20th century analytic philosopher with a wonderful beard. He said, pain just means roughly something that causes you to avoid, when your body's damaged. That's just what it means. Like poison just means, kills you when you ingest it. Now, so if you have that view, well, yeah, of course, it's not, it's inevitable that pain is going to cause avoidance behavior. But if you don't have that view, if you're on my team, so to speak, thinking, no, that's how it feels and what it does. Why couldn't they be mix and matched in any old way?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I agree that it's conceivable. The first thing to note is that I suppose, in practice, this would probably be a self-annihilating view. Like if experiences which were really, really like horrible to go through caused people to seek them out, then depends what you mean by horrible to go through. Because like I'm thinking, if we just suddenly flicked that switch today, and suddenly everything which was really like internally painful caused people to seek it out, everybody would be dead within like probably about 20 minutes, right? Because they would just sort of seek out the most painful possible experiences, which would involve, you know, thrusting themselves into fire and slowly roasting themselves. Maybe they keep themselves alive for some amount of time because they would want to sort of, you know, roast in an oven or something. But I'm beginning to sort of lose track of what we mean by the word, what we might mean by the word like desire or want in this kind of context. Like, I don't think a behavioral definition of desire is what we should be interested in. We should be interested in, are there states which one person prefers over another? And even if their preference for something not to be the case causes them to seek it out, even if them, you know, absolutely hating heat for some reason causes them to go and seek out heat like hot things, I still think we can just say that they would desire not to be hot. And it might be that they are seeking it out, their physical body is hurtling over there, and if you asked them, they say, no, I love heat, I'm running over to the heat because I love it so much. Like, everything about their behavior is pointing towards that, as long as we just stipulate that internally they dislike the feeling, they don't like it. I think that's just what it means to not desire it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At least I think that makes more sense than the alternative, which is to say that, well, desire is what someone's behaviorally predisposed to do. So if somebody, you know, really, really, really just doesn't want to hiccup, but is hiccuping anyway behaviorally, well, then we'll just say that they must desire to hiccup. It's just that they yearn to not have that desire. Yeah.
Right.
And I just think that that's not a sort of... we are kind of playing with words here to some degree, and that if we decided to define our words that way, we'd be welcome to. But I just feel like the only thing that desire can mean is something like a preference for a different outcome, you know?
Okay, preference. And when you say preference, you're meaning something experiential there rather than behavioral.
But then it's difficult to define preference without being a bit circular and referring to pleasure and pain. Like, you know, you prefer an outcome if you predict that it will bring you more pleasure. Because just to be clear, by the way, I don't think people do desire cake. I think they desire...
Speak for yourself. Go on.
I think they... Well, I know you don't even desire cake at all. You'd be going for the salt and vinegar crisps, but like, I don't think you do desire the cake. You don't. And there's a relatively easy way for me to prove this, I think, which is that, like, suppose you were like, oh, I really want to go to Australia, you know? Like, I just really have this really strong desire to go to Australia. And then you go to Australia, and it turns out that it's like crap. It's nothing like what you thought it was going to be. You don't have a good time, you don't enjoy it, and you come home. Well, you'll be tempted to say something like, well, I thought I wanted to go to Australia, but I guess I didn't. But that's not quite right, because there was something that you did desire that simply wasn't like that wasn't met when you went to Australia. You didn't desire just to go to Australia, because if you did, then your desire would have been satisfied no matter what happened there. What you desired was like the pleasurable experiences you thought you were going to get when going to Australia, right? You don't desire a cake.
Right.
You desire the pleasurable experience you think you'll get from eating the cake. So if you eat some cake and like it turns out that it's poisoned, I wouldn't say like, oh, well, you thought you desired something. It turns out you were wrong, doesn't it? It's like, no. Like, if we're being technical about this, I just desired a thing that I didn't get, you know? It's not that I got it and it turns out I didn't desire it. It's that I didn't get the thing which I actually desire, which is the pleasure. So when we talk about like desiring like cake, and it's like, oh, someone's just predisposed towards getting cake, I don't think that internally people desire anything in and of itself except for pleasurable experiences. I'm like a psychological hedonist.
Okay, right. I want to come back to that exact what you've just said then, that people don't desire anything other than pleasure. I want to come back to that. We've got to come back to Sean Carroll and the knowledge argument. But maybe I should just cut to the chase with where I'm trying to get with this, because we're half an hour in and perhaps you're thinking, what the hell, what the fuck are you talking about here? The audience might be thinking, what the fuck are you talking about? I do actually think there's a very important philosophical issue here, which we're slowly getting to, what's become known as the problem of psychophysical harmony. I've got an article in Scientific American if people want to check that out. And it's frustrating for me because I feel this is one of the most important philosophical problems. I think it's going to absolutely change the world, but it's really hard to get people to think it's an issue.
Yeah.
Like, people are just like, what the fuck? This just sounds like bullshit. With something like fine tuning, whatever people ultimately think of it, they get the issue. Okay, why are the numbers just as they are? That's what we were talking about on your channel. But with this, people, but let me try and cut to the chase and see where we go. So you talked about, what if we suddenly switch things so that people pursued painful things and vice versa? Yeah, okay, then we'd all die quickly. But what if in inverted Ian's universe, from the start, right, things are just set up such that pain causes you to seek things, pleasure causes you to avoid things, right? Now what would happen then is we would evolve like Ian, right? We would evolve to feel terrible pain when we eat and mate and so on and drink, but that would make us do those things. Conversely, we'd feel wonderful pleasure when our body's torn apart, but we'd avoid it, right? There is something absurd about this. There is something absurd about inverted Ian, but I don't think it's a logical or conceptual absurdity. Right?
Yeah.
The only way you could say it's logically or conceptually is if you're an analytic functionist. If you think pain is just defined behaviorally as, avoiding things that damage your body. And I know you don't think that. Once we reject that position, then I think we have to say inverted Ian is conceptually coherent, is logically coherent, maybe even metaphysically possible. What is absurd about inverted Ian? And I just invite people to, because as soon as you hear about this inverted Ian, you're like, your bullshit detectors, like, why are we talking about this? But I would just invite people to just think carefully about what is absurd about inverted Ian. Now, we finally get to the punchline. What is absurd about him is a rational absurdity. He's doing completely the opposite of what he has reason to do, right? He feels pain. That gives you a reason to avoid, but he goes for it. He feels pleasure. That gives him a reason to seek, but he avoids it. There is, I suggest, a rationally appropriate, objectively speaking, a rationally appropriate connection between pain and avoidance and between pleasure and seeking. And as soon as we say that, we're in the game of objective value, which I think you deny. So this is finally where I've been trying to get to.
Yeah.
I think either you give up your qualia realism, or you give up your no facts about value, but you can't have it both ways. There we go. Only took half an hour. Gonna take a quick break from the chat with Alex, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, can panpsychism offer a middle way between God and atheism? Yes, it can. And that's why I wrote a book modestly titled, Why the Purpose of the Universe. And you can pre-order this book in paperback right now, if you want to. You don't have to. Okay, let's get back to the chat with Alex. So I used to be a value anti-realist, and it seemed plausible to me when I was just thinking about morality, like murder's bad. Maybe that's just us projecting our negative emotions onto the murder or something. But if you're going to be an out-and-out value realist, you've got to deny more subtle value connections, such as the connection of rational appropriateness between feeling pain and avoiding Forget morality. I'm talking like in my own case. I think, if I feel pain, it's appropriate, it's rational for me to avoid. If I feel pleasure, it's rational for me to seek it out, because that could be counterbalanced, put that on one side. And you've got to deny that. You've got to say, no, pain could equally go with attraction. And so what inverted Ian shows is two things, I think. And maybe I said the first and not the second. Firstly, there clearly is something absurd here. And I think the only way you can make sense of the absurdity is to say, well, because there is a connection of rational appropriateness between pain and avoidance and pleasure and seeking, that's what gives you the absurdity. But second, once we accept that, then we've got a bloody deep mystery. Why in the actual universe are conscious states hooked up to rationally appropriate behavior? Why does pleasure tend to lead to seeking, which is rationally appropriate? Why does pain tend to lead to avoidance, which is rationally appropriate? Now, everyone always says at this point, evolution, but no, we've already covered that, because if we lived in inverted Ian's universe, we would have evolved like him. It would have been awful. We would have, been eating all the time, and it would have been horrible, but that's what we would have done. So it does feel stupid, this, but I think when you think carefully, it's strong proof, I would say, both of value realism and of a very deep mystery about our universe.
No, I am understanding what you're saying, and it's supposed to be ridiculous, right? Like, it's supposed to sound silly, because of course inverted Ian is a stupid. It'd make for a great sitcom, wouldn't it? Inverted Ian and his sort of inner monologue as he's going about his life. I feel as though
we should make that, Alex. We should make that show.
Yeah, we can trademark that. I think, man, maybe as a first sort of flag here, and I should have. I'm aware of the fact that I'm interacting with this live on air for the people at home, and for two reasons. For two things.
Fair
Firstly,
enough.
That might mean that I'm saying something stupid, and secondly, this might be a total waste of time, because, wouldn't you rather listen to someone who knows what they're talking about? But I'm really I don't want to go interview mode here, but I typically really enjoy making sure that I'm on the same page as the person I'm speaking to. So I want to build this out. I kind of want to say, maybe as a compromise here, it's not that pain gives some objective justification for avoiding certain behaviors, but rather that I'd rather use the word motivation. Right. Now, I guess you'll want to ask the question, is it logically possible that pain could motivate the seeking out of those painful experiences? And maybe, right? Maybe there's a world in which, if I put my hand on a hot stove and it burns and really hurts, that just causes my hand to stay there. I just don't think that can be possible on an intuitive level. So I want to work out why is it that there is this connection between pain and this motivation for avoiding pain? And I think you want to say here, well, it's because there is just this objective truth about the matter, that there is just there is just a reason to avoid pain that is just built into the universe. Maybe. But then you're a panpsychist. So you believe that my hand is kind of made out of consciousness, right? Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, the particles or the fields that make it up are conscious, yeah. Not the hand as a whole, but...
No, of course, but that's why I say the hand is made out of consciousness, rather than... I'm not saying the hand is conscious. The hand is made out of consciousness, right? So, okay, so then when I touch a hot stove and my hand actually moves away before I've even registered it, right? It's a reflex action. It just yanks away. What do you think is going on at the level of the consciousness inside the hand and inside the hot stove that governs that particular behavior? Because if the universe is made out of sort of tiny little atoms of consciousness, I mean atom in the Greek sense, then you kind of have to describe the entire functions of the world and physical activities in terms of consciousness, right? Like the interactions of fundamental particles and the way that they sort of combine to produce objects and the effects that they have on each other is, in the way the physicalist thinks that's reducible to physics, you would say that's probably reducible to laws about consciousness. And so I just want to kind of get a grip on what you think is going on at the level of the consciousness in the hand and the consciousness in the stove when the hand touches the stove and yanks it away.
Yes, it's a good example because I guess in these cases, it's not our pain that causes the avoidance because it happens too quickly, right? So what is going on at the level of the particles or the fields that are causing that? Well, as I say, so I think to my mind, there is a deep mystery here. If you accept that inverted Ian is coherent but absurd, then that shows that the absurdity is in that there's a rationally inappropriate fit between the feeling and the behavior. And then that leads us to, well, why in our universe does consciousness and behavior go together in a rationally appropriate way? So some people, Dustin Crummett and Brian Cutter, have said, well, this is an argument for God. So God's, made the laws of nature so consciousness and behavior fit together in an appropriate way. I don't think we need to go that far. So I propose in my Why book a view I call panagentialism, which is sort of like rationality or agency, not just consciousness, but rationality or agency goes all the way down. So basically, even down to particles and fields, things are responding rationally to their conscious experience. So the particle isn't deliberating and thinking, oh, what should I move away from the stove? But presumably it feels some very crude form of revulsion and it responds rationally and avoids. And the reason the universe is so predictable is because particles can't deliberate. It's when you deliberate, you think, oh, well, all things being equal, should I stick with the pain or avoid the pleasure so I can lose weight or something? But the particles they're like, I was raising young infants when I wrote this stuff, and if a kid wants some chocolate, it's gonna go for it. So particles are like little kids. And actually, would you just finally, just for interest, I think this fits quite well with Bohmian quantum mechanics. I try to spell that out this sounds ridiculous. People are now going to think, what the fuck are you going into quantum stuff? But actually, so Bohmian quantum mechanics is, we have two things. We have the wave. So like, what do we do with wave-particle duality? Bohmian mechanics says, well, there's a wavy thing and there's particles, right? It gets rid of the mystery in the most prosaic way. That's why I like it, actually. I don't really like mystery. I want to do away with it. People think I like mystery. Okay, so you got the wave function, the wavy thing, and the particles, and the wave function kind of pulls around the particles. Now, one worry philosophers have had with this is like, the particles don't seem to be doing anything. They seem epiphenomenal. They're just getting dragged around. So on my interpretation, my panagentialist interpretation of Bohmian quantum mechanics, what the wave function is doing is setting up desires, is setting up pleasure and pain in the particles that they're yearning or they're revulsed. But the particles are what respond rationally to that, right? They go, oh, this is nice, yeah. Or, ah. So that's what I think is going on with the stove. But it sounds wacky, but I think we've got to address this. The only way to avoid it is to say, no, pain is just defined behaviorally. Okay, then the problem goes away, but you give up the qualia realism. So yeah, so this is what I'm saying. There's either we give up qualia realism or we go for some kind of value realism. Maybe you don't have to believe in moral realism. Maybe you could be like an ethical egoist that I've just got reason to pursue my own pleasure. For me, once I'm in the game of believing in objective value, then it's easy to sort of get back to conventional morality. But all I'm saying is we have to embrace some sort of very minimal value realism, namely that there's a rationally appropriate connection between pain and avoidance,
Yeah.
and moreover that somehow the laws of our universe are supporting that rationally appropriate connection.
Okay, I've got a lot to say here.
Go for it. I've talked for too long.
No, it's great, and I love this kind of stuff, right? I'm thinking panagentialism is interesting. It's like, you know, you as a philosopher, Philip, panpsychists in particular, you know, are probably, you know, accused in the same way as, like, you know how people who come up with like a million genders and different sexual orientations, and there's like pan this and ultra that and Z. It's like the panpsychists do the same thing whenever they encounter an objection. It's just, no, I'm a experiential pan non-dualist epi mini phenomenal, you know, doing that all the time. So
do people come up with a million genders? I know the kind of the right always seem to say that, but whenever I talk to lefty people, it's just always, you know, trans and non-binary, and that's about it. I never really seem to come across these million genders.
Which is actually just, it's like there's one extra, except it's kind of thought of as neither of them, as a sort of this non-binary.
And there's trans
people in the world
as well,
who do the sort of neo-pronouns and stuff. But I think that's such a negligible contribution to the field of gender studies at this point that to make a song and dance out of it is literally a waste of time. Anyway, I think...
Back to the point.
I think that you have got quite an unparsimonious panpsychism there, because you want to say
How dare you?
You want to say, I know, in your own home as well. You know, I'm on your show now, and here I am with this ghoul. I think that what you're doing is saying, like, okay, there seems to be some connection between pain and the avoidance of pain. It can't be a logical connection. It can't be like a necessity thing. It can't be behavioral, because that, for reasons that we've just discussed, that doesn't seem like it fully suffices. So there must be some justification. There must be some like rational justification that connects pain and the avoidance of particular outcomes. Great. And then you say, okay, so what's going on at the sort of more fundamental level? And the panpsychist says, well, quite simply, consciousness is really is very sort of simple and rudimentary, and it abounds in the universe, and that's what stuff is all made out of. And I say, okay, well then, what's going on at the atomic level in the consciousness of atoms that yank themselves away from fire? And you say, well, because I've got this view about the connection of like experiential states and like appropriate behavior, I also have to now say that there is this thing called rational justification, which also now extends to the bottom of the universe. Which, look, maybe that's true, but it's that seems to me to diminish some of the parsimonious beauty of just answering the problem of consciousness by saying, hey, it's consciousness all the way down. If you have to say, well, it's consciousness all the way down, but because of that, and because I'm a moral realist, I've also now got to say that there is a rational justification that's sort of embedded into the universe, that suffering would rationally motivate avoidance of particular states, and that is somehow in individual particles. I'm like, whoa, okay, like bells are ringing, like flags are waving. That's a little bit much for me. How am I going to think about this? Well, okay, I am really into the idea that the universe is made out of consciousness, and I don't know if panpsychism, that is like loads of individual little balls of consciousness out of which you make stuff, is a better way of thinking about it than one great big mind out of which individual things are made, like idealism. I don't know which of those is like makes the more sense. I don't know whether you should account for the cake in terms of the crumbs or the crumbs in terms of the cake. You get what I'm saying? We have a tendency, because I think you talk a lot about how we've just swallowed the scientific revolution and not even realized that we're adopting particular ways of thinking that are totally wrong, but we're just so used to the scientific way of thinking that we just run with it. I think one aspect of the scientific revolution that perhaps the panpsychists are clinging onto is that in order to understand something, you start small and then build up to the big. Right? That seems very natural, right? If you want to understand what something's made out of, you break it apart into its most fundamental constituent elements, and then you sort of build them back together again to build up the big picture. But that is, as Ian McGilchrist would say, a very left brain way of looking at the world. I think there's no sort of like in principle reason to me that in trying to understand something, it makes more sense to start with the small stuff and then see what it makes than to start with the big stuff and see what it's made out of. And I think the panpsychist starts with the small stuff and the idealist starts with the big stuff, and they're sort of coming at it from a different angle. Anyway, whichever of those is true, I kind of want to say that I have no problem with the idea that suppose when a physicist says, well, what an electron is the most fundamental unit of negative charge, right? And then you say, okay, but what is the electron? What is it? That's what it does.
Yeah.
What is the electron? And the panpsychist wants to kind of say, well, it's some form of rudimentary experience. Maybe the universe is made up of irreducible types of experience, which, again, because we're talking about the quantum level here, whatever the experiences are, they're going to be very rudimentary and very simple. And maybe in the same way, again, that the physicalist says that there are just different types of fundamental particles. They're fundamental, and they can't be broken down any further, but they come in different forms. They come in different shapes. They've got different charge, different spin, whatever. Maybe we just do the same thing with like conscious states. We just say that at its most fundamental level, the fundamental unit of resistance, like conscious resistance, like reticence or something like that, is what the physicalist calls an electron, And maybe the opposite of that is what they might call a positron. And maybe there are other kind of unique forms of rudimentary experience that are cashed out by the physicalists in terms of the different fundamental particles. But for us, when we say, well, what are those things? They just are those individual units of will, of desire, of a particular kind of like feeling, right? Experiential state. Such that when an atom repels another atom, that is experienced by the atom, or by the electron, let's say, as a kind of like experiential resistance. And it's not that you've got this physical thing that... The reason I'm going down to the atomic level is because I think as a panpsychist, you want to say, it's not really that you've got like this physical thing called an electron, which behaves in a particular way. And for some reason, along with that, you're hypothesizing that it has an experiential state of it. It also like experiences it. That's not what you're saying. You don't say that there is this physical thing called the electron, and it also has this experience. Isn't that weird? These physical electrons have experiences. No. You're saying that because we don't know what the electron is, we're going to say that it just is the same thing as experience. That's what an electron is. It's a kind of experience. It's a kind of experiential state. In which case, to try to connect or to try to talk about the sort of strange connection between this physical behavior of an electron and the experiential state becomes a nonsense question because they're just the same thing. So I think when you put loads and loads of individual little particles together, you end up building up much more complex forms of conscious experience. So when you put them together in a human brain, you've got all kinds of stuff going on, but it's just obeying the same rules, such that like when you experience pain, you're just experiencing a very sort of complex version of what the electron experiences in the most fundamental level. In the same way that when you have a really big electrode that's negatively charged, it's the same kind of thing that's just going on in an individual electron. It's just much bigger and much more complicated. Same thing with the brain. When you experience pain, pleasure, whatever, the two sovereign masters, you are just experiencing at a much higher level and much more complex fashion the same kind of thing that, say, an electron or a positron is experiencing, just in a much more sort of complex organization. And just as with the electron, that experiential state just sort of is what an electron is. I kind of want to say that maybe the behavior that results of pain is just what that experience just does. That's just what the experience does. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not that there is this like physical thing called a brain that feels a particular way and then causes a particular kind of behavior. It's just that like the experience of pain just is. I guess it is a bit behavioral. It's like the I kind of want to say that if you feel pain, it just means that just means the same thing as behaviorally avoiding it, right? Which is the behaviorist account, but only in the same way that for an electron to be negatively charged just means that it has a particular kind of rudimentary experience. You know, it's not like some extra thing. It's not like there's this physical thing that has this strange quality that we need to attach somehow. I'm not really entirely clear on the panpsychist account of this, but I want to say, is there some kind of avenue here where, in the same kind of way that the panpsychist just says, there is no mystery as to why an electron does a particular thing, because an electron just is the kind of thing that experiences, that has a particular kind of rudimentary will and behaves in a particular way accordingly. Can that not just be the same thing on a bigger level? Does any of that make any sense? I really don't even know what I'm saying here, but I think I'm trying to sort of skirt around the edges at getting to a point where, like, I spoke to Bernardo Kastrup, who I know, you have some run-ins with and whatnot, but one thing I really like about Bernardo Kastrup is the way that he thinks that the universe is made out of mental stuff. And when you kind of look at a brain and you go, well, why is it that I can see this sort of smudgy thing? That it's really there. I can touch it and see it and I'm experiencing it. And yet from the inside, it's an experiential state. But from the outside, it's this sort of mushy pink thing. And Bernardo Kastrup is just like, look, like, maybe a brain is just what an experiential state looks like from the outside. Maybe it's as simple as that. There's not two different things that are connected. It's just what it looks like. My finger from the outside looks like a finger, and from the inside feels like a finger. But it's one thing. It's just it feels like it from the inside and looks like it from the outside. And I'm just wondering if, like, maybe, like, behavior is just what experience looks like from the outside. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, very cool.
Do you
That
get-
is
do you get what I'm
loads
saying?
of, yeah, I think so. Loads of very interesting stuff there. So just firstly on this, near the start, you contrasted sort of idealism, where the kind of whole universe is conscious, to panpsychism, where the little things are. And I guess we've come full circle, like this is the kind of thing Bernardo tends to say. So I mean, I would reject that that way of carving things up. I think, that one dominant form of panpsychism is cosmopsychism, that the universe as a whole is conscious and particles are just sort of local excitations in that universal consciousness. And insofar as I understand Bernardo's view, it seems to me a different way of describing cosmopsychism. So, yeah, I mean, if it is just, the material thing is what consciousness looks like from the outside, then the universe is conscious. This thing cosmologists study, they study it from the outside, but in terms of what it is in and of itself, it's consciousness, and it's just consciousness. Now, Bernardo talks about things like on the screen of perception, and then I'm a bit like, is that supposed to be a metaphor, or? And I don't really know what he's getting at then. It sounds sort of like a kind of naive view of perception or something. But insofar as he just means, no, consciousness is just what the thing is, the physical thing is, well, then it's just a form of panpsychism. I mean, call it idealism, call it panpsychism, two different ways of describing things. And now this panagentialist view I've described, I talked about particles, but you could have a cosmopsychist version of it, where it's the whole universe that is having desires and is rationally responding to them. So I tend to always, maybe I shouldn't talk about panpsychism in terms of conscious particles. It's sort of an easy way into it, but you can equally well have the universe first versions. Very interesting what you're saying at the end. So you seem to be saying, so I guess what I'm setting up here is how things feel on the one hand, what they do on the other. Yeah. Some kind of separation, at least at a conceptual level. And then oh, how come they connect together in this rationally appropriate way? You seem to be trying to dissolve that. And that's very interesting. And I know you said to me before we started, you're having Galen Strawson, my former PhD supervisor, on. He wants to say things that sound like this. He has some cool German words that that express it. He somehow thinks he likes to, and it does sort of work better in German. So I'd be interested to hear how you go with them. Another person here we could mention is Hedda Hassel-Mørch. Mørch, spelled M-O-R-C-H, a very good Norwegian panpsychist who wants to defend what's become known as the phenomenal powers view, that there is some kind of necessary connection between pain and avoidance. They are somehow conceptually inseparable, even though it's not just defining pain in terms of behavior. So I suppose I do struggle with all this, and well, it's interesting if this is where we've got to, and I guess that is pointing the way to your response to my challenge. I suppose I do find that hard to make sense of us, but yeah. So in some sense, I agree with you. Yeah, there's just consciousness. What we call matter is just consciousness, as I like to say. Matter is what consciousness does, but still,
and maybe behavior is what experience does. You know?
But still, I still think, like, especially, I mean, think of it this, it's over time, isn't it? So, okay, it's how my pain's feeling now. What's it going to do in the next second? There doesn't seem any, I think Hume is right about that. There's no logical entailment to what it's going to do in the next second, even if it's just consciousness. So it's an impact on consciousness, its own consciousness or the consciousness of something else, but still, what it's going to do in the next second is not conceptually entailed. So you've at least got that separation. Just finally, so just to summarize where I think this gets it to. So you started off saying my view's not very parsimonious. I was thinking it is parsimonious in the sense that all there is in the universe is just conscious matter responding rationally. That's it. That is the only causal principle. So you could respond to this worry about what's become known as psychophysical harmony with just conventional libertarian free will, that, you know, in human beings or higher organisms, some primitive rational responsiveness emerges, and then that's why we avoid pain, we go for pleasure, because human beings have this primitive rational responsiveness. I mean, my biggest worry about libertarian free will, which is not the conventional one, is that you just have this binary where human causation is radically different to what's going on at the fundamental level. So what I like about my panagentist view is I think it is very parsimonious that, no, it's all libertarian free will. It's just everything's just, that's the only causal principle.
Yeah. Because it's interesting, right? Because you've got this view that libertarian free will is not possible because, I don't know, like the universe is made out of atoms, and atoms just like bump into each other. And if that's what governs the universe, including brain activity, then there's nowhere for freedom to like creep in. But if the panpsychist kind of says the same thing as the materialist to some degree. Both of them say that physical stuff and conscious stuff are basically the same thing. It's just a case of which direction you take that in, right? And you can do the same thing with freedom. You can say, well, yeah, like your brain activity is just a bunch of atoms bumping into each other. It's just that those atoms are themselves consciousness with some form of rudimentary will, such that writ large, you do just have a very complex organization of like experiential states that are free and which act in a particular way. Now, of course, you run up against the combination problem, not just here for unified conscious experience, but also like unified will, because people want to say that I have a will, you know? Yeah. But I'm happy to just stay in the boat of saying you don't have free will, because there is no you. There's no individual Philip Goff with a sort of unified center of consciousness and central will. You know, your two hemispheres want to do different things at the same time. You know, part of you wants to be over here, part of you wants to be over there. But that to whatever degree there is will occurring, I can say, yeah, sure, it's free, because the stuff that makes it up is itself like a free conscious agent. At least that's how I can sort of imagine the panpsychist view accounting for freedom, but I'd still be reticent to say I am free. I'd want to say there is like freedom happening, you know what I mean? And I'm like participating in that free exchange of atoms. But I still struggle to sort of account for how my will would come out of fully conscious atoms.
Yes. Yeah. So you're totally right. I mean, I think this has to be a strong emergentist form of panpsychism. So there are very reductionist forms of panpsychism, like Luke Roloff's is perhaps most known for defending, where it's the closest to physicalism, where there's just conscious particles, and when you stick a load of them together, you get a mind, and that does face a particularly hardcore form of the combination problem, because it sort of seems conceivable that you just have conscious particles and there's no consciousness associated with the whole. But there are also, and Hedda Hasse-Merck is probably most known for this, and she's very much influenced me in this direction, strong emergentist forms of panpsychism, where there are radically new forms of unity, forms of consciousness that pop up. I've also, people might be interested in my paper, how exactly does panpsychism help explain consciousness? At the start of my career, I wrote a paper called Why Panpsychism Doesn't Help Explain Consciousness, and before my conversion to panpsychism. And then I've spent the rest of my career solving my own problems. So more recently, I wrote a paper called How Exactly Panpsychism Helps Explain Consciousness. And I sort of try to have a hybrid view of these two strong and weak emergentists, where the mind is irreducible, but its conscious experiences are sort of inherited from the consciousness of the particles. But anyway, I think in some sense this panagentialism is going to have to be a form of strong emergence, that I have my own free will. That's not just, it's hard to see how strong, I mean, the whole point of free will is like the action's not, the choice isn't determined, right? Yeah. So it's going to have to be sort of my choice that's separate from the little particles making me up. But maybe this is coming to, what I would also like to ask you about your views on the combination problem. So, I mean, usually when you ask a guest onto a podcast, you ask them about their views, and I've just sort of indulgently subject you to all my views. But we have had little... Yeah,
we can talk about the combination problem. I kind of want to... I want to clarify sort of where we're up to here. Like, I don't know exactly how to catch this out.
It's all got a bit confusing, isn't it?
The way I'm thinking about this, like, psychophysical harmony, right, is that if you're a panpsychist or some kind of idealist or something like that, then for you, like, the psycho and the physical are just the same thing. And so to say psychophysical harmony is a bit weird. It's a bit like how, like, I've got some magnets here. Right? I love magnets. I think they're just so cool, right? And they just sort of like attract each other. It's just something that they do, and it's a complete mystery as to why they do that. And there's a great video of Richard Feynman being asked about magnets. It's so funny because there's an interviewer just being like, so when magnets attract each other, like what's going on there? Why do they do that? And Feynman's like, well, they create a magnetic field which attracts other and the interviewer's sort of like, sure, but why as in like why do they do that? Why do they? And Feynman's just like, what are you talking about? That's it. That's all there is. And it's a great example of what I see as the problem when people sort of come after me for trying to get more out of science. Because I'm just like, that just doesn't, and the thing is, the interviewer isn't like me. They're not trying to catch him out or something. They're just genuinely sort of like confused. They're like, why do magnets do that? And like, put it this way, right? Suppose I said to a scientist, like a physicalist, why do magnets attract each other? And they say, well, because of these things called like, the laws of magnetism, right? I said, okay, but what if, I don't know, like, isn't it weird to you that like the laws of magnetism so consistently line up with the behavior of the magnets. And they would go, well, not really, because that's kind of the same thing. Like, I'm just saying that the laws of magnetism is just what like magnets do when they sort of attract each other. And then I said, yeah, but you could conceive of, imagine if you had the same law of magnetism, but it made the magnets repel each other instead of attracting each other. That's just what it made it do. I think the physicalists would just kind of go, okay, but then you'd just be changing what the nature of the physical law is. I say, no, like the physical law is exactly the same, but now the magnets behave differently. And the physicalist would go, that doesn't make any sense. Not because they think there's some intrinsic connection between the law of magnetism and the behavior of magnets, but because they kind of just see them as like the same thing. And I'm wondering if in the same way, like when you say, well, you know, why is it that people behave in particular ways? And I say, oh, it's because they desire, you know, they avoid fire because they desire to not get hurt. And you say, well, what if, you know, isn't it weird that they're connected? And I kind of just want to say that maybe they're just the same thing. Maybe the behavior is just what the desire does, in the same way that the magnets attracting each other is just what the laws of magnetism, as the scientist has it, just do. And so when you then say, well, what if can you just not imagine inverted Ian? Like, can you not just imagine someone who is in a ton of pain but then seeks out the thing anyway? And I'm just sort of like, maybe not, because that's like asking me, can I imagine, and conceivability is limited here. Like if I said, can you imagine an electron which is positively charged? Like you could say, yeah, I just posit it in my head. Okay, there's an electron and it's positively charged. But there's another sense in which you just say, yeah, but then it's just a positron. You're not even talking about an electron anymore. And I kind of want to say maybe a similar thing's going on when you say, what if pain just motivated like desire and attraction to the thing causing pain? Could you conceive of that? And I'm like, yeah, in the way that I could conceive of a positively charged electron. But like realistically, you're just describing a positron. And realistically, Philip, you're just describing pleasure instead of pain now. Do you know what I mean?
Right, good. So, okay, so let's just think about the different options here. So one option is just to say, inverted Ian is possible and there'd be nothing weird about him, nothing problematic about him. Okay, pain and avoidance go together in our world, they don't in his world, so what? That's just how things are. Okay, that's the kind of most unpopular position, right? Then another option is to say, no, there is something impossible about this guy, right? There's something impossible about him because pain is just defined behaviorally. Okay, but you're not wanting to go there. You want to say we can't even make the separation. So it's not that the behavior is the fundamental thing and the pain is defined in terms of it. It's just we can't make this separation.
Yes.
I suppose I just want to say, well, look, at least at a conceptual level, surely there are things we can distinguish here. So, I mean, here's what Hedda Hasselmerk wants to say are necessarily connected: pain and trying to avoid. So two sort of conscious states, pain and effort to avoid. I mean, even then, there seemed to me, I mean, if these are separated over time, that's what I suppose I keep coming back to. If they're separated over time, then surely there's a conceptual separation in the sense that it's not a contradiction to say one without the other. I mean, because the world could have ended before the second one happened. But even if we grant that, even if we say, okay, pain and avoidance, pain and trying to avoid, they're connected. But now, what about actual behavior? You know, like I scream and I run away and I mean, surely there are two things that at least conceptually we can distinguish: how it feels, the conscious state, the first person, and then this stretched out over time behavior where you're wrestling with the murderer. And now, look, I'm not saying ultimately they are separate. I don't think they are. I think they're necessarily connected because the universe is inherently disposed to rational appropriateness. And so they do have to go together for that reason, and maybe that's an essential part of consciousness. But still, I see where you're trying to go, but I just can't get there, because it just seems surely we can distinguish how it feels from the inside, as it were, and this extended over time behavior. Can you at least help me out?
I get the time thing is interesting there.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to, like, I imagine that a physicalist would have the same intuition where they would say, but like, no, I can separate out like an electron from like what it does. Like, yeah, an electron is negatively charged, but like that's what the electron sort of does. And I know it gets a sort of a little bit murky, because again, you can sort of conceive of like, well, an electron has charge. There's this thing called an electron, and it's got a particular kind of charge. But when you press the physicalist, they end up having to say something like, no, I suppose the electron is just defined in terms of its charge. In which case, whereas prior to that, they could have conceived of a positively charged electron. So yeah, sure, I can just switch the charge, that's fine. When you realize that, like, based on their metaphysics, that's just not even a possibility, suddenly they can't do that anymore. And I wonder if there's like something metaphysically contradictory about being a panpsychist, being essentially a monist, right? You're a monist, you believe there's one kind of substance. There's not the psycho stuff and then the physical stuff. There's just one kind of stuff. And now you're saying to me, but Alex, what about psycho-physical harmony? If there's only one type of stuff, Philip, then like, that's like me saying, what about the harmony between physical matter and physical matter? Isn't that really weird? Like,
okay, so let's take Let's take on this analogy with the physical. What is the physicalist going to say about mass? Well, different physicalists say different things about mass. So my colleague Stephen Mumford, for example, thinks physical properties are just defined by what they do, right? So that's analogous to the analytic functionalist position, that pain is just defined as avoidance behavior. Okay, so then I agree, you don't get the logical separation. But that collapses just into, if we bring it over from the analogy, that's just the analytic functionalist position that we're rejecting, right? Other physicalists will say, no, mass isn't essentially connected to any behavior. It's the laws of nature that fix what it does. That used to be very popular, maybe getting less fashionable these days. Again, David Lewis, very influential, late 20th century, had this kind of view. Well, let's not get distracted by all the different subtleties here. But then you're back to the position, well, yeah, pain and avoidance behavior are separable, and we've got this mystery of how they connect up. So so either way you go with that, I don't think the analogy is gonna serve your purposes. I agree. I agree. There's just consciousness in terms of what stuff is. But still, I think for us at least, there's some sort of distinction between what it is and what it does. I mean, maybe when God looks at stuff, he just sees, oh yeah, it has to do that. That's just God sort of sees the essence that involves its causal products. But for us, thinking about how pain feels and then how you move your body on the basis of your pain.
But I think
maybe we'll go around in circles.
This is probably tied up in a few things. Firstly, I think you have to break things down so they're more simple and realize that at least on a simple level, when we ask, like, why couldn't a really sort of rudimentary unit of consciousness desire one thing but act sort of out of accordance with that? When you make it really simple, it begins to sort of seem a bit more conceptually murky. Like, could you have, like, if say an electron is just a fundamental unit of negative desire, that's just what an electron is. What would it mean, say, that an electron experiences, say, like, negative charge, but acts like a positron? Like, what if every positron felt the same as an electron? As a panpsychist, you're probably going to want to say that doesn't make any sense, because what makes a positron do what it does is just the experience that it's having. That's what a positron like is. And similarly with an electron, the reason why it's like behaving, so to speak, in a particular way is because that's just what its experience sort of is. As you said earlier, physical stuff is just what consciousness does, right? It's just what it does.
Yeah,
And so you could say something like, what about the inverted electron? You know, what about inverted Ian, but Ian's an electron, where, you know, he is like internally experiences nothing but positive charge, but for some reason that causes him to behave with a negative charge. You'd be like, well, that doesn't make any sense, because it's not like there's this thing called an electron that's got an internal charge that then causes its external charge. You know what I mean? There is just the charge. And as a panpsychist, you say that's just what it is that's just a unit of experience that manifests as behavior. And to say like, but what if it internally was a positron and externally was an electron? It's like, that doesn't make any sense. And for the panpsychist, human beings are just like really complex arrangements of the same kind of stuff. So although it's a bit more murky and harder to get your head around, the same rule applies, which is that like physical stuff just is what consciousness does. And behavior is a physical thing that consciousness just does. And it's like the same thing. You can't separate them out. It's like, can you imagine a physical object that doesn't have any spatial extension? No, it's just because that's just what physical objects do. They extend. You know, that's just the same. You can sort of you can separate out the concepts. You can separate out like the substance from the extension. You can separate out the matter from the form, but they always coincide, and they are essentially like manifesting in the same object, even though you can sort of conceptually pull them apart. So yeah, and then I'm also suspicious of the extent to which there are individual selves. Like, I don't know what your view on the self is, but I'm pretty open to the idea that the self is an illusion or whatever, and there's no individual sort of unified Philip Goff. And I think a lot of your intuitions about like, well, yeah, in most cases maybe what it is and what it does are just inseparable. But with humans, it feels different, right? It feels different because we've got these sort of complex feelings, and I can move my body and stuff. But I think all of those intuitions are going to rely on the idea that you are a self who sort of controls this physical manifestation, and you're sort of this unified agent that's at the helm. A lot of philosophers just think that that's an illusion, and if that's an illusion, then so must be any of the sort of philosophical insights we can get that rely upon that illusion.
Okay, I'll have one more go at this. and then you can have the last word. So you said earlier on that you talked about the positron acting in accordance with its sort of positive feeling. Now that to me sounds like what is rationally appropriate. You know, that if it's having this positive feeling, it's rationally appropriate that it pursues. And yeah, I'm up for that. So we're back into this game where there is this positive connection between feeling good and pursuing, and consciousness is inherently set up to pursue rationally appropriate behavior. But if we drop that and we're just thinking of a positron that feels good, right? Mm-hmm. I want to say, I don't know what it's going to do next. You know, if I'm just talking about what's non-contradictory, that's what we're talking about with conceivability. What's non-contradictory? What is it going to do in the next moment? Mm-hmm. Is it a contradiction to say it will avoid rather than pursue what it's feeling good about? Surely not. As soon as we're over time, I mean, here's another way of making the point. I mean, do you think epiphenomenalism is logically incoherent? I think epiphenomenalism is false, that consciousness does nothing, but it doesn't seem incoherent. It's logically possible that consciousness does absolutely nothing. I mean, the way to get there, actually, go through Descartes' process of doubting everything that it's possible to doubt. And you end up with just, I'm this conscious mind that might not exist a second later, but I might not do anything. And so as soon as you accept that epiphenomenalism, that is to say consciousness doing absolutely nothing, just hanging around, and the brain does all the stuff, as soon as that's a logical possibility, that seems to me, that's enough for me. You've got a separation between how consciousness feels and what it ends up doing, and that's all we need to get inverted in off the ground.
I don't know, because
go on, you have the last word, Alex.
Epiphenomenalism requires that there's sort of physical stuff and then mental stuff. it requires that consciousness is this sort of extra thing that emerges out of or sits on top of this other type of stuff. And I just see no coherent analysis of what this other type of stuff is. This is why we're panpsychists and idealists and the like, is because every time someone tries to say, well, yeah, there's consciousness, but that just, consciousness comes out of or sits on top of or supervenes upon this other stuff. And we're just like, well, what other stuff? What are you talking about? You can't even define it. You can't. So like, I want to say it's not logically impossible, but not because I think it's logically possible, not because I'm like, yeah, I can totally conceive of epiphenomenalism, but just because I'm like, well, I mean, I can't say it's false, but that's only because an epiphenomenalist can't really tell me what the other stuff is that it supervenes upon. So it's very difficult for me to say that it's impossible because I don't know what they're talking about, you know?
Oh no, I said I'd let you have the last word, but I want to say
I think it's like, yeah.
What if, because it's a different point, what if just on the interesting point you raised, you know, how, because panpsychists like to say this, you know, we don't even know what is matter.
Yeah.
You know, physics tells us what it does. What is it? But what if you had a sort of, I'm just thinking now as you're saying that, what if you had a sort of panpsychist epiphenomenalism where, okay, the particles are conscious, but then your consciousness doesn't do anything. It's just Alex's consciousness doesn't do anything. And, you know, my consciousness and...
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Now, I don't think that's true, but it's conceivable, isn't it? We can't rule it out on logical. Well, that's all we need for my. It's conceivable that my consciousness doesn't do anything, and therefore, it's what it does is sort of logically separable from what it is.
Yeah. Okay, then maybe I should say that. So I think that's conceivable. Maybe it's not, but let's just say that it is. That means that I just have to weaken my position. I just have to say that I'm thoroughly convinced that these two things are not separable. Might be logically possible, but I think that they are not, in which case, like, I can't say with certitude that, you know, emotivism and consciousness are compatible. But I still sort of believe that that's the case. Maybe sort of something like that. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I will let you. Well, I'm interested to listen to your talk with Galen Strawson, and because it's reminding me of certain things. And maybe you should chat at some point to Hedda Hasselmerk as well, who's inclining in that direction. But actually, well, okay, let's move on from this. I want to come back to the psychological hedonism. So we've been talking about. We've been talking for a long, long time now about whether yearning is somehow necessarily leads to pursuing. Mm-hmm. But what about the other way around? So let's come back to your claim, psychological hedonism, that necessarily you desire pleasure. Right, this seems to me false. Okay, so let's. So here's my counterexample. The unfeeling scientist, okay? So let's call him Bob. So Bob is a very good scientist whose sort of life work is advancing science in a certain area, maybe finding a cure for cancer, maybe, I don't know, certain astronomical observations. But Bob has just lost any enthusiasm. Even when Bob has some great success, he doesn't really feel any joy about it. But he's just sort of established that as his life goal, that he's going to advance science in this area. Maybe he feels good about other things. Maybe he's got a dog and, you know, has fun with his dog. But in terms of his science, his fundamental life goal, or one of his big life goals, is advancing science in a particular area, but has absolutely no joy from that, no positive feeling. Isn't that coherent? That seems to me perfectly coherent and a counterexample to your psychological hedonism.
I'm not sure, because I kind of think that conscious behavior is always motivated by preference. I think that in order to consciously act, there has to be a way that the world is not that you would prefer it to be. Like, and that seems to imply a level of, like, investment, you know, like if you are genuinely, and so of course I can imagine a dispassionate scientist, but the reason that's so intuitive, I think, is because we all know people who sort of don't care that much about their job. They're like, whatever, I don't really care about my work. But obviously they're there for a reason. They're trying to make money, or they want something to do, or whatever. If you actually took away all of those motivations, no desire to make money, no desire to have something to do, no boredom, which is a form of suffering, whatever. You just took all of that away. I don't think the scientist would show up to work. I think it's like conceptually incoherent to say that there is zero motivation. There's no physical compulsion, of course. There's no gust of wind pushing him into the lab. It's got to be him consciously going, I'm now going to go into the lab. And the question will be, well, why? And if the answer is for no reason whatsoever, then the behavior is ultimately random. And then at best, you'd get a 50-50 sort of attendance rate. So if he's consistently showing up for work, it can't be random. There must be a determinate cause. And that's the same thing as a motivation. So the question is, can there be motivations that don't involve pleasure and suffering? And I would say, to be more specific with your counterexample, what is the motivation that is detached from pleasure and suffering?
Okay, here's Bob's motivation. It is a better world if science is advanced. And Bob is a value realist, and he just thinks, I think the world will be better if we have more scientific understanding. Now, maybe you as an anti-realist say, okay, that's a false belief of Bob's, that there aren't any facts about value. But okay, fair enough. But Bob believes in objective value, and he thinks, look, the world will be better. But he personally feels absolutely no pleasure. He's doing it out of duty, right? He's good old-fashioned, this is my duty. I want to make the world a better place. What do I mean by want there? I want to say that's completely separable from pleasure. Want in the sense of has the psychological aim of doing this as a fundamental aim. Bob is aimed at it because it will be a better world, even though Bob, kind of doesn't like it, would rather be playing with his dog. He's doing it to make the world a better place. That seems to me completely coherent, and there is absolutely no pleasure in his connected with his motivation there.
I maybe this is just like an intuition clash, but I just struggle to believe that somebody can be motivated by the desire for a better world without getting some kind of positive experience from the thought of fulfilling that aim. Because I kind of want to say, like, if Bob doesn't care, then the fact that, and is a moral, let's say that realism is true, it would be a better world if he goes into the office. That's just a fact. It's also a fact that the sky is blue. And it's also, if it's just a fact that has no, pleasurable or suffering connection to a person, it's just a fact about the world, then I don't see how that could be a motivation. Imagine if somebody said to you, I went to work today. Oh, why'd you do that? Because 2 + 2 = 4. You'd be like, what? What are you talking about? It's like, no, it's just a fact about the world that 2 + 2 = 4, and that motivated me to go to work. You'd be like, I don't understand why some random fact about the world would change your behavior. Now, intuitively, we want to say that that the fact that the world will be a better place if you go into work is not as detached from going into work. But that's only because we're so used to them coming together. In your thought experiment, these are just completely separable. There's a fact about the world that Bob knows, which is that the world will be a better place if I go into work. And then there's the decision whether or not to go into work. And there's no connection of pleasure. There's no sense in which that fact is motivating him because of things that he enjoys or doesn't like, or suffering. It's just a fact. It's
Hume's Hume's got a lot to answer for here. It is a deep clash of intuition here. I just think, how on earth do you get to the position that the only thing that can motivate is pleasure? I mean, I think all sorts of things motivate me. Advancing understanding is, I think that's worth doing. Or helping other people, even if it makes me suffer. Or artistic achievement, right? I think think of a situation where someone gets, midway through their life, and thinks, what do I want to do in my life? I want to do something that makes a difference. I don't think they're thinking, I want to feel more pleasure than pain.
Yeah, but
I think
I
they're
don't know.
thinking, I want a meaningful life. I want, and you know, even if, I mean, I guess in most cases there is some pleasure involved, but it could be. I mean, often, for example, the tortured artist, often there will
Yeah.
be more suffering. So maybe they get some joy, you know, somewhere along the line, there's scattering. But I think it's very, very common that there's more suffering in the life of many artists, and they could have more pleasure by sitting on the beach, whatever. But they think, no, this is worth doing. This is creativity. This is what human beings are all about. Why is that
Philip,
incoherent?
because like you know, play back the tape and watch when you said, well, you know, but I feel like somebody, like the suffering artist, they just sat there and they're just going, and you went like, and they're just going, but I just want to do something meaningful, and you scrunched up your face like you were in pain. And that's exactly it, because the person who's feeling that is feeling a kind of suffering. They're like,
they're feeling driven. They're feeling driven, but why think it's all about pleasure and pain? They're feeling driven because they want to make a difference. They're not saying, I want pleasure. They're saying, I want to make a difference. I don't see why that, I think that can be, the question is, where does the motivation base bottom out, right? Why can't the motivation bottom out in, I want to make a difference? I think this will make the world a better place. I think this will advance understanding. Why can't that be the bottom line? I think common sense is saying that, you know, that's often the bottom line. Why is the bottom line always pleasure?
Because,
I just don't, why think that?
Because facts are not intrinsically motivating. Because reason is the slave of the passions. Because, like, you said, well, no one ever says that they, you know, they desire pleasure. They say that they desire to make the world a better place. Yeah, but, you know, I typically don't say, like, it'd be very unhelpful if I was technically correct all the time. Like, if we went to the pub and we go into the bar and you're like, what do you want, Alex? And I was like, a pleasurable experience. Like, yeah, okay, but what beer, you know, what beer are you after? You know, I'll say that I want a beer when really what I mean is I predict that I'll get the most pleasure from having a San Miguel instead of an Amstel or something, right? But what I'm technically saying is I think that will be a more pleasurable experience. So in the same way, when someone says, I want to make a difference in the world, whatnot, and it doesn't require that they believe doing so will make things more pleasurable. It just requires that they are feeling or predict that they will feel suffering for not doing that thing. So like, as in either of these can be motivating. So the artist who sat there, who's just itching to create something, like I can imagine an artist who's like, you know, I don't mind going through this suffering because I want to produce something important. And if they hadn't produced anything in a while, and you went to them and it's like, how's it going? And they were like, I just really want to make something. You know, because they're sort of suffering for it. What you'd have to imagine is an artist who you go to meet and you're like, you know, you haven't made any art in the past year. Like, how do you feel? And they're like, yeah, no, I don't care. It's fine. Yeah, that's all right. Like, oh, I thought you cared about your art. And they're just like, no, I just think there's just this fact about the world that, you know, art is good, but I don't care. I'm not like personally invested in it. You're like, okay. And it's like, anyway, now I'm off to go and like do a bunch of drugs and ruin my life and make myself extremely miserable in pursuit of this aim. And it's like, oh gosh, you must really want to produce some art. It's like, no, there's just this fact that is true, and that's why I'm doing it. It'd just be like, you'd have to, the reason it's so intuitive to say, well, you can be motivated by duty is because we're just so used to not noticing that when somebody wants to do their duty, it's because they feel like there's some reason to do their duty, you know? Like there's something that they're getting from it, you know? And that if there weren't, it just becomes a fact. And that's why I mentioned the sky being blue earlier, because if these kinds of facts can motivate, you've got a problem of how they're connected. Like, why is it that a descriptive fact is somehow connected to psychological motivation? Why, again, with your like inverted Ian type thing, can't I imagine a world in which every time I convinced somebody specifically that, you know, that 9 times 9 is 81. That there's just a world in which anytime somebody just believes that specific mathematical tautology to be true, that pretty universally makes people go, okay, because of that, I'm going to get a haircut. Can you conceive of a world in which that fact about the world, that 9 times 9 is 81, just motivates people to get a haircut? To me, I just think that is absurd. I just don't see how there could be a connection between the psychological motivation and just some fact about the world. Now, in your view here, that people are not motivated by the way they feel about a particular fact or the pleasure that they predict they will achieve by utilizing a particular fact, but just by the fact itself, just by the fact that X is good. That is as mysterious to me as them being motivated by 9 times 9 equals 81. You know what I mean?
Right. So I agree with you in the bar case. I think pleasure is one of the things that can motivate. Yeah, and I think when you're choosing a beer, that's what you're looking for. You're seeking pleasure, and that's one rational thing to pursue. But now look, you come to this Humean dogma, if I could use that word, of states of the world. Bring in a bit of rhetoric, that'll win the argument. States of affairs cannot intrinsically motivate. But Alex, you're denying that with your very example. Pleasure is a descriptive state of affairs that intrinsically motivates. That's been this big discussion. Pain is a state of affairs, but it's not the only one, right? Also, things like the fact that this will advance understanding can intrinsically motivate. Now you say, well, okay, this is like the fact that 9 plus 9 equals 18. That couldn't but fair enough. Look, I'm an objectivist about these things. I think humor's wrong. Motivation isn't just about, I like this, I feel pleasure, I feel pain. I think a lot of it is about rationally responding to things that objectively give you reason to do something. So pleasure is one of them, gives you reason to pursue, ceteris paribus. But also advancing understanding, creativity, making the world a better place. These can just be fundamental points where motivation bottoms out. So just finally, I think we just keep coming back to I think you end up having to say things are logically impossible that clearly aren't logically impossible, right? It is just clearly logically possible that there could be somebody, let's call them Bob, who doesn't find any pleasure in something, but is set up, is willfully pursuing it because they believe it advances understanding. And that's the fundamental. You're saying God couldn't make that person. God couldn't make someone whose motivation bottoms out in the fact that this will advance understanding, even though they get no pleasure from it. And that's just clearly logically possible. So this I think this is the absurdity of your view, that you end up, of the Humean view, you end up.
Maybe I am saying God can't do that, because I'm wondering if it is just a fact that fact can't motivate. If it's just true that facts
apart
on
from
their
pleasure
own can't. But the thing is that I wanted to take right with that, because you were like, yeah, but you're saying that pleasure can motivate, and pleasure isn't a fact. You're not motivated by the fact of pleasure. You're motivated by the experience of pleasure.
I mean, not before it happens. If I'm choosing my beer and I think that is going to make me feel good. Now I'm not feeling it yet. Yeah, I'm not feeling it yet. So that can't be what's motivating me, in the sense of actually initiating the action, because I haven't got it yet. I am deciding to do it because of the pleasure, because of this descriptive state of affairs.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
It's not a normative state of affairs, because of how it will make me feel. So I am responding to a descriptive state of affairs, right?
Okay, so maybe, yeah, okay. So in that instance, it's not that facts can't be motivating. It's that facts can't be intrinsically motivating. Like, when you predict that something will bring you suffering, you say, I am now motivated to avoid that. But that's because if you were asked why, you said, well, why am I motivated to avoid that? I would say, well, because I'm motivated to avoid suffering. And you say, well, why are you motivated to avoid suffering? It's because when I experience it, I don't like it. That's why I'm motivated. And I predict that that's going to happen in the future. And that fact is motivating my behavior, but not intrinsically. Because if I didn't know that I didn't like suffering, then you could say, oh, this particular behavior is going to bring you suffering. And I'd go like, okay, interesting fact. Anyway, let's get on with what we're doing. It's only because that fact is being activated by a passion, by my sort of distaste for suffering, that it becomes an actionable thing. But I get what you're saying. Like facts can be motivating. They just can't be intrinsically motivating. It can't be that that's the only reason. Like if I said, you know, if it were true, like imagine I said to you, like, I don't want to do X because it will be really, really painful. I just think it'd be really painful to do X, so I don't want to do it. And you then said to me, oh, interesting, so you don't like pain. And I'm just like, what? I didn't say that. No, I'm indifferent. I like pain, you know, I'm totally indifferent to pain. Sometimes I enjoy pain. I'm just motivated by the fact that it's going to be painful not to do it. You'd be like, okay, but the fact that you're motivated not to do it because of the pain sort of seems to entail that you want to avoid pain. And I'm like, no, I'm just motivated by the fact in itself. You'd probably say, I think you're a bit confused and your thinking is incomplete. Similarly, if someone says, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to perform this action because it's my duty as an Englishman. And I said, man, you must really love your country. And I go like, oh, no, I don't give a damn about my country. I don't take any pride or pleasure or interest in my country. It's just my duty. You'd be like, okay, but I think you're a bit confused there, because surely that desire to do the duty has sort of come from somewhere. And they're like, nope, just exists. I think most people, maybe they'd be wrong here, but most people would be like, you are not going far enough. There's something missing.
Okay, I want to take both of these, right? So look, you're saying, okay, this is going to cause me pain in the future, so that's why I'm avoiding it. And you want to say, well, that's not a descriptive fact intrinsically motivating, because I know that I won't like it. Okay, but what does that mean, I won't like it? That's another descriptive state, the fact that I won't like it. Okay, the fact that I won't like it is intrinsically motivating me. So I think if you're going to be, I mean, this is honestly the things that persuaded me autobiographically to adopt value realism. That if you're gonna be consistent in saying facts don't motivate, then you say the fact that you won't like it shouldn't motivate you. You should be indifferent. Now, I do want to say something about the person doing it because it's their duty as an Englishman. I think only a philosopher would find that confusing. I'm a philosopher. I love philosophers. But I think you say to a person, there's someone who doesn't, wants to go out to fight the war, and they think it's their duty as an Englishman. They don't feel any pleasure. But they feel it's their duty, and that's where the motivation bottoms out. That's a bit philosophically sophisticated. That's the bottom line. I think that people will understand completely what you're on about. Yeah, people can take the fact that it's their duty as the bottom line. It's only once you get wrapped up in this Humean, I'm going to use the word dogma again. I'm sorry, it's unfair rhetoric, but that you think, no, that can't be right. Why not? Why not? God can create someone whose motivation bottoms out in the fact that they think it's their duty. Why not?
I think the most interesting part of this is whether your prediction that it will bring you suffering is itself just a descriptive fact. Because if it is, then you're right. Then I am committed to the view that facts can be intrinsically motivating. But you said, you're making the prediction that you're going to suffer, and that's intrinsically motivating. No, I don't think so. I think it's still extrinsically motivating. In the same way that, like, the fact that you have a duty to your country is motivating. That is a motivating fact. It's just not intrinsically motivating. It's not motivating on its own. It sort of gets it. The motivation is pumped into that duty by the suffering that you will feel from not doing your duty. Now, you might say, but your prediction of suffering is itself just a descriptive fact. Yes, which is why it's not intrinsically motivating. The thing that is motivating is the pain and the pleasure. So, like, when it actually comes time to act, let's say, you might be predicting in the future. Like, let's say, when the enemy comes, I predict that I'm going to get up and take my rifle and go to war. And you could say, well, why do you say that? And I say, well, because, I'll suffer if I don't. And you might be like, oh, but isn't that you being motivated by a fact? It's like, well, no, because right now I'm sat in a chair. I'm not picking up a gun and going to fight. I'm predicting that I'm going to do that in the future. That's just basically a prediction. When I say I'm going to do this, I'm just predicting what I think I'll do in the future. But it doesn't need to be motivating right now because I'm not doing anything right now. If it were intrinsically motivating, then I'd be like getting up and grabbing a rifle right now before the enemy has arrived. That doesn't make any sense. No. What I'm saying is I predict that when this thing happens, I will do my duty. And then, like, the only moment in which I actually do the action is when the moment calls for it. And when the moment calls, I'm either getting pleasure by doing the action there and then, or I decide not to act and I start to suffer for it, and that's what motivates the action. So, see what I mean? Like, I'm sort of saying, like the thing that motivates the action when the action happens is the pleasure and the pain. Like, when the enemy invades and when they start shooting, when you then go, like, I want to do my duty right now, that's not you just reflecting on a fact and then acting motivated by the fact. That's you feeling the pleasure or the suffering involved in that decision and acting in accordance with it.
So let's just take the case of where the pleasure's in the future. I'm choosing this beer because it will give me pleasure. So why isn't that the fact of that I will feel pleasure that's intrinsically motivating me?
Yeah, good question. Like, look, maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I want to say something like, I want to answer this in a way that doesn't seem like I'm just trying to sort of grasp at straws to retain the point, but like, I don't know. Like, I'm a terribly anxious decision maker. Like, if you ask me, do you want this drink or that drink, or do you want to meet at 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock? I'll sit there and I'll go like, oh gosh, because 3 o'clock may be better, but then when it's finished, it will be dark outside, and do I really want to? I'm going to have stuff to do. I'm going to be sort of, and I feel as though, like, there's an extent to which I am feeling a kind of suffering. Like, even if, like, there are situations where I could be in the pub and you could say, which beer do you want? And I could sit back and say, well, I could predict that one's going to make me feel more pleasure than the other. But in that particular moment, I sort of go, oh, whatever, just get me something, your choice, right? The only time in which I'm going to be like, give me an Amstel rather than a San Miguel is when I think to myself, well, like, if you said I'm going to get you an Amstel, then I would feel something. I would feel there and then, I would feel this like, that I want a San Miguel. I'm taking suffering now from the expectation of the suffering of the wrong kind of beer, right? Because, like,
so you don't think
an expectation are feelings themselves of suffering.
You don't think you can purely base it on the knowledge that it will. You don't bring to mind the pleasure of the San Miguel. Is that the better one?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. It will bring you pleasure. Is that not possible to?
I think, okay, let me put it this way. I think that
Again,
doing
it seems
that,
something God could make.
Doing that is logically possible, but in such a world, strange as it may seem, somebody would not be motivated by the prediction of the pleasure or the pain. I think that in this logically possible world where someone has genuinely completely detached to them, they could, like, conceivably go, I predict this thing is going to bring me loads of suffering, but yeah, let's go ahead and do that. But I just think the reason that seems so weird and
no, I
is
meant...
because...
Sorry, I was thinking, misunderstanding maybe. I was thinking of the case where you go for the beer that will give you pleasure.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, but when you're doing it, you don't bring to mind the pleasure at all. You just know that it will bring you pleasure.
I think
so that's why you choose that.
In that logically possible world.
I mean, I think that happens all the time, but
I don't think it does. I think in the real world, you're actually, and it might be very minute and trivial, but the decision of what beer to get is a trivial decision, essentially. You are literally in that moment, you are experiencing some kind of anticipation or expectation, and that in itself will be a pleasurable or a displeasure or a relatively more or less pleasurable experience.
It never happens that you're in the middle of, you just think, oh, I know that one will bring me most pleasure.
Like, we're not robots, are we? Like, if we were at the pub and you said, like, you know, what beer do you want? And I'm like, oh, what have they got? Oh, they've got Amstel. Oh, and they've got San Miguel, and they've got Guinness. Yeah, I'll go on. I'll have a Guinness. You know, because
obviously
I'm
we do that a lot, but
I'm like, oh, Guinness, yeah, great, awesome. I'm feeling the anticipation. If I were like we're not robots who sit there and go like, what do they have? They've got San Miguel, cool. They've got Amstel, and they've got Guinness. I've just registered a fact, which is that Guinness is likely to bring me more pleasure. And based on that fact, I'm going to... No, it's like you see the Guinness and you go like, oh, yeah, I'm kind of excited. I'm attracted to it. And that's the kind of pleasure. That's the motivation. The fact itself is incidental.
You're so absorbed in the humane dogma. Sorry, I've got to stop using that word. That you equate, if we're not acting from pleasure, it's not just pleasure now, it's pleasure in the moment, then we're robots. I would say, no, we're not robots because we're responding to what we have reason to do. I judge this will bring me pleasure, and so I'm going to do it because it will bring me pleasure. I don't have to feel pleasure. Or this will bring somebody else pleasure. It won't bring me any pleasure, but it's going to bring someone else pleasure, and I respond to that. Or this will advance human understanding. And so that's not about being a robot. I think that's just responding to what you have reason to do. And we've suddenly got this position now where it's always got to be like, I mean, yes, sometimes obviously pleasure comes in, and like sometimes we're just so driven by yearning, you know, when you're absolutely starving or driven by lust or something. But most of the time you're not pushed and pulled by your pleasures. It's in the mix, but you're making judgments about what you have reason to do. I think that's common sense.
This is why I think people always pick examples like a beer or something, because they seem so trivial that it's easy to say something like, you know, well, you're not being pushed and pulled by pleasure and pain and that. But that's because it's trivial. Like, it's very, very minor. But yeah, I think you are. I just think it's very minor. I think when you go to the pub and someone says, do you want a Guinness? And you go like, yeah, go on then. Even if it's extremely, I'm not saying you have to be like gagging for a Guinness, but it's a very minor sense in which you might be like, yeah. And you sort of there and then in that moment of anticipation, you feel something. Like if you didn't feel anything in that moment, you might just as well have been like, I don't really care. It's a fact that it will bring me pleasure, but I don't care about that fact right now. That's just a fact, but that's not a fact I care about in this instance, which has the same effect of like forgetting it, right? If you have no emotional connection to the fact, it could be a fact that you prefer Guinness, but if you've just like forgotten that fact, or you don't like, or maybe you don't know that fact, then it's uncontroversially true that would not motivate you, that fact would not motivate you to get the Guinness. Yeah, maybe a true fact about the world that you like, that Guinness will bring you pleasure, but if you don't know that fact, or if you've forgotten that fact, that's not going to make you do something. Okay, so you have to know the fact. But why would knowledge of a fact like change like on its own your emotional behavior any more than knowledge that 2 + 2 is 4 could change your behavior?
I just
because
don't
when you
feel
hear that fact, it makes you feel something. It makes you feel a kind of passion, and it might be very minute passion, but it's a passion nonetheless. And I think that's what motivates the behavior.
I just think outside of a philosophical context, you say to someone, how can the fact that the fact that it advances human understanding motivate you? How can the fact that it helps someone else motivate you? So what the hell are you talking about? Why shouldn't it? Anyway, but let me say, okay, suppose you're right that there's always a pleasure there that's motivating you. But why isn't that still responding to a fact that's intrinsically motivating?
Because I think that particular facts, let's say that maybe knowledge of particular facts causes pleasure and suffering, and then the pleasure and the suffering is what motivates. So again, like the facts are motivating, but only extrinsically, only insofar as they're married up to some kind of feeling. Like there's a fact that you prefer Guinness, and then upon hearing that fact, it makes you feel an anticipation for Guinness, or it makes you feel excitement, or it makes you feel anxiety at the prospect of being delivered an Amstel instead. And of course, this will be like the most minute form of, and maybe anxiety isn't even the right word there, but that's negative experience that's broadly defined as sort of a minute form of suffering. You're feeling that there and then. Like imagine like I prefer Guinness, and you went up to the bar, and I knew that you were ordering me an Amstel. If I just didn't bring it to mind, or I just accept it as a fact, like Guinness brings more pleasure, but he's getting me an Amstel. That's just a fact about the world, whatever. The only thing that would make me get up and walk over to you and go, actually, Philip, can you get me a Guinness instead? Is if I was sat there and I sort of went like, I do want a Guinness though. Like, and I'm feeling this sort of suffering, this sort of like, oh no, I don't like that this is happening. I better get up and do something. If I didn't feel that, if I just knew the fact that you were over there ordering me an Amstel, then it would just be something that happened, you know? In order for me to be motivated to change something, I've got to feel a particular way.
Right. So the pleasure's there and it's motivating you, but wouldn't you still say you're doing what you're doing because of the pleasure? And so isn't that you
because of the pleasure that I'm feeling in that moment?
Responding. Yeah. Okay.
Not because of a fact about pleasure, not because it's true that I will experience pleasure or whatever, but just because of the pleasure itself is the motivator.
Yeah, but aren't you responding to that pleasure? So isn't that still a fact of the world, namely your pleasure, that is intrinsically motivating because it makes you do it?
No, because
so you're responding to the pleasure.
It is a fact that I'm experiencing pleasure, and it's a fact that I'm motivated by the pleasure, but I'm not motivated by the fact of pleasure, Like, in the same way, Philip, it's
What's
a
the
fact.
Difference?
It's a fact that, burning fuel makes a car go, right? Makes a car go forwards. It is a fact that burning fuel makes the car go forward, but the car doesn't go forward because of the fact that burning fuel makes cars go forward. It just goes forward because of the fuel. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's not the fact about the world that makes the car go forward. It's just the thing itself. Maybe another example, just for the sake of anyone listening, like, like when an object falls to the ground, it's because mass bends space-time, right? That's why objects fall to the ground. They don't fall to the ground because of the fact. Like, it's not that objects fall. Why do objects fall to the ground? Well, because of this fact. The fact makes them fall. No. The fact describes the thing which makes them fall, which is the bending of space-time itself. Not the fact that space-time bends, but just that space-time is bending. That's what makes it fall. Same way, like, it is a fact that you're motivated by pleasure, but you're not motivated by the fact that you're motivated by pleasure.
Okay. So you want to get rid of this binary, but how come pleasure motivates and knowing that 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't motivate? Why is it pleasure? There just seemed to be something.
I'm glad you asked.
It's intrinsically motivating. Go.
Because pleasure is a feeling, and propositions are like factual apprehensions. And so what you begin to notice is that, actually, isn't it weird that there are some things like pleasure, pain, anxiety, desperation that seem to intrinsically motivate, and there are other things like belief that the sky is blue and knowledge of maths and stuff that don't intrinsically motivate. Isn't that weird? And isn't it also weird that the only actions which we call like ethical decision making are ones in which there seem to be this level of motivation? So hold on a second. There's this category of things in the world called like propositional facts. And there's this other category of thing called emotions. Isn't it weird that only the emotional ones seem to motivate and only the motivating ones seem to be ethical? What can we conclude from this? Well, that what we call ethical statements are just emotional expressions. That's how you get to emotivism, by noticing, as you just asked. Well, why would it be that like these experiential things, these feelings motivate, but like factual claims don't? Because that's what ethics is. It's the expression of emotional states.
But why are these certain states motivational and others not, according to you? I mean, I wonder whether we're getting back to where we started in that. Yeah. It seems to me you can distinguish between, at least conceptually, between what it's feeling and what it's doing. Now, as soon as you do that, well, now we've got, call it an emotion or a pleasure, you've got a state of feeling and what it's doing. And if you're saying, oh, it always leads to doing, whereas other states don't lead to doing, I want to say, well, why? What's going on there? What's special? But are you saying that, no, the state isn't just a feeling, it is a doing or something? Is that I guess that has to be the thought.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, like tying back to what we said earlier, I guess, yeah, maybe. yeah, maybe.
I mean, it still seems to me weird that like if it's always the pleasure, okay, you want to say there's always the pleasure pain pushing you. Yeah. But so I mean, if you're going to, and you said that because you were worried about future states of pleasure pain motivating me. But then do you have to say future pleasure and pain never influences me? I'm never sitting here thinking, well, I'm going to save up my pension so I'm not suffering in my old age. It's just the feeling in the moment that's, the future thing is really irrelevant.
Well,
it's just the pleasure and pain of thinking about it. Sorry?
Why don't you want to suffer in old age?
Because suffering is intrinsically worth avoiding in the same way that the suffering of others is intrinsically worth avoiding, in the same way ignorance.
Are you putting a pension in place for every other person in the world as well?
Well, I would, to some extent, act selflessly. I do privilege myself to a certain extent over other people.
Sure. So why are you worried about your suffering when it comes to the pension? Why do you care about your future suffering right now?
Well, we're getting into difficult questions in normative ethics, aren't we? That some people would say, no, we should have a radical utilitarian view where I don't value my own pleasure over others. I guess I'm inclined to think, I'm a moral objectivist, I'm inclined to think that my own suffering has more rational significance to me than the suffering of others, but I think that's consistent with my view. But in your view, it's only my own, and now it's like my own pleasure and pain right now. Not even my future pleasure and pain. It's only my own pleasure. I mean, I don't know. It's just, at what point does this Humean view become a reductio ad absurdum? That I can't even think about my pension in the future, that my potential suffering without a pension in the future. No, it's just the thinking about it, and that makes me miserable. And then it's that in the moment that's motivating me.
Well,
that's surely not.
You can't be motivated by something that hasn't happened yet. You can't literally be motivated by a thing in the future. You can only be motivated by a thing that exists now, and the thing that exists now is your knowledge of the future. It's your prediction of the future. You can't be motivated by the future event if you didn't know about the future event.
Yeah, there's a distinction between it's not causally making you do it, but I would say it's what you are responding to. I think
exactly.
I think I would say,
and the response is the pleasure and suffering that you sort of feel at the thought of the future event.
I would say I save in the pension. Actually, my university does it for me. But anyway, I save in the pension because of suffering in the future. So that is what is motivating me. That doesn't mean the future state of affairs is. So I just think, I mean, there is quite a common distinction in the literature between normative reasons and motivating reasons. So there's what's actually causing you to do it, but then there's also what facts of the world are you responding to.
Yeah, and in this case,
They might be future pleasure pain. There might be future pleasure pain of yourself, future pleasure pain of others, or other. Anyway, go on. You have the last word on this. I think we've.
We're just talking. We're not talking about normative facts here. We're just talking about motivations, right? That's why pension's quite good, because a pension doesn't really seem to be an ethical thing. It's more sort of like just self-interestedly, what's going to make my life go better, and. I don't know. I just feel as though if somebody genuinely took nothing but pleasure at the thought of their future suffering, and every time you said to them, yeah, but you're going to suffer in the future and it's bad, and then they just go like, oh yeah, give me more. Oh, I just love the thought of it. I love the thought of suffering in the future. I can't. I'm just so excited about it. I can't wait. That person would not be motivated to contribute to their pension. And you could say, but don't you know it's a fact that you're going to suffer in the future? And they go like, yeah, but I love the thought of that. Let's make it worse for myself. I'm going to spend all of my money, make sure that I'm going to suffer in the future. On your view, there could be a person who just loves, who is just like, I want nothing more than to suffer in the future. But I'm going to avoid that anyway.
I think that's logically possible. It's like, Parfit's example, I think came up in one of your discussions, of the person who desires their own pain every other Tuesday, and it's just like, I think these are logically possible, but they're so obviously irrational. And I think human beings, it's a primitive fact that we respond rationally, at least in some sort of basic way. And so it's just so obviously irrational that nobody's going to do that. But, I don't think that's a problem from my view. That just falls out of... Go on, you have the last word. You have the last word. And then,
I need to think about this more, specifically the extent to which being motivated by future events is either motivated by a feeling you have now about a future event or just by the fact of the future event. And my intuition... My prediction, my supposition is that you are motivated by how you feel about your prediction rather than just by the prediction itself.
Surely the future thing is playing some role. I keep saying you have the last word, and then I say...
Well...
Go on, I'm definitely going to stop now.
No, it's okay. Yeah, the future thing is playing some role. It's just not intrinsically motivating. That's why, the Humean doesn't say that facts are not motivating. They say they're not intrinsically motivating. Because, of course, facts can change your emotions. It's sort of like how, if you were just distraught that it was going to rain on your wedding day, you're just, really upset. Emotions, being upset, is not the kind of thing that can be true or false or, rationally approached. But it can be influenced by truths and falsities. Like if I convince you, actually, you read the wrong weather report and it's actually going to be really sunny, then suddenly you'd be really happy. And I haven't talked you out of your suffering. I haven't rationalized it. It's just that while upset and suffering and fear and that kind of stuff are not propositional, there can still be facts which influence those feelings. They're just not intrinsically on their own enough to motivate behavior. So you say there's something about the future that's playing a role here. Of course there is. The fact that I will suffer in the future plays a massive role in motivating my behavior. It just does it extrinsically. It's that fact causing a particular feeling, and it's the feeling that then motivates. That's probably what feelings are for, evolutionarily. That's why they evolved, because conscious agents who are completely indifferent to facts about the world will not act in reaction to them. They will not react to facts unless they feel something upon the apprehension of those facts. And so, for all intents and purposes, in practice, we could just talk as though facts are motivating, because oh, well, the fact that I'm going to suffer in the future, the fact that it's raining outside makes me want to take an umbrella. But in the same way, we do this with like is ought statements. I say like, it is raining outside, therefore I should take an umbrella. And for most practical purposes, because you've said a few times now, but like, you know, if you said to somebody, you know, but why are you really doing that? They would go, what are you talking about? That's just where it ends. That's where it bottoms out. The same thing would happen there. If I said to somebody, why are you taking an umbrella?
Fair enough, yeah.
And they said, oh, because it's raining outside. And I was like, yeah, but why does that follow? They'd be like, what? But
that's
the
a fair
philosopher
point. That's
is
a fair
recognizing
point,
that
yeah.
because although what you don't realize you're doing is you are assuming a particular kind of like is ought. You're presuming a kind of ought, and you don't realize that. Same thing's going on here. Like when somebody says, well, you know, I don't want to go outside because it's raining and that will cause me to suffer. That actually, you're not just motivated by that fact. You're feeling a particular way about that fact, and that's what's motivating you to stay indoors right now.
Yeah, that's a fair point, though. Where things bottom out, I mean, the ordinary person might not be interpreting that in a philosophically sophisticated way to mean, really where it bottoms out. But if you're saying like the future suffering only motivates by the present feeling, then it seems like if my future suffering always causes me present pleasure, then I could always go for my future suffering, right? If I just, is that?
Say that again.
So if it's always the my future pleasure and pain is only motivating me by my present pleasure and pain. Well, then suppose we have someone who every time they think of their future suffering, it gives them present pleasure.
Yeah.
It seems like, on your view, that they're always going to act for their future suffering.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a possibility.
I think that's a necessity. I think that's what they just would do.
We're back to it's a different version of inverted Ian then, isn't it? A sort of diachronic across time. So then we've got a question: how come that doesn't happen? Yeah. Okay.
Well, that might just be an evolutionary contingency, you know.
Okay, well, this is interesting. So I need to think more about that. So I think we've given people a lot to think about the distinction between motivated by your future pleasure you're no longer feeling and your current pleasure you are feeling. Do we have time to talk about why Sean Carroll's wrong about the knowledge argument, or are we shattered?
I'm flagging a bit, but I'm sure we can, especially if we don't go off on a 2.5 hour tangent about it. I'm sure we can.
Yeah, let's have another 5 minutes or so on that. Sure. I've discovered podcasting that Americans don't have the word shattered to mean very tired. Anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think Sean misunderstands the knowledge argument, and I mean it is just what he was talking about is just not what the argument is. There's only one academic philosopher I've come across who's interpreted the argument the way Sean does, and that's Patricia Churchland. Quick anecdote: I was having a Twitter row about Patricia Churchland on this, saying, "Look, you misunderstood the knowledge argument," and every single philosopher was saying, people who don't agree with me were saying, Philip's right, you miss it. And then Frank Jackson himself emailed me. He was watching this discussion and said, why is she misunderstood? Okay, so Sean's understanding of the argument is just like that we anti-physicalists are supposing that, if you're colorblind, just reading the neuroscience of color vision should give you the experience. And of course it doesn't, because of having the right brains. That would be a terrible. He's right. That would be an absolutely terrible argument. Nobody thinks that, right? The point is, and I think you pressed Sean on this. The point is, there's information that you can only get from actually having the experience, right? Yeah. There's information that a colorblind scientist can't get from the neuroscience. And that seems to be inconsistent with physicalism, right? That if physicalism is true, and you've got the complete neuroscience of color vision, that should be all the experience. So an analogy I give in my Galileo's Error book, suppose I have the complete theory of black holes, the complete and final. I can't then go and learn some new information about black holes, like Hawking radiation or some new essential. No, I've got the complete story. So it shouldn't. If physicalism is true, you should get all the information from the physical science of color. You shouldn't have to actually have the experience to have some new information. Yes, you won't have the experience just reading all the neuroscience, but you should have all the information.
Yeah,
that
exactly,
is
yeah,
what Sean has never got.
But one thing you could say is that maybe like there is just no new information. When Mary steps outside and sees colour for the first time, there's no new information. There's just a new kind of experience, but we shouldn't consider that as a form of knowledge or a form of information. That's why we give it a different word. That's why we call it experience. And I think that would make sense to people. But then all that would do is posit that there is this sort of extra thing in the universe called experience that maybe, you know, if Mary had all of the information, she would still not have the experience. But then you're kind of just left with this problem of like, well, then what is the experience? Why is it there? Like, what is that extra thing? And how can we study that, you know? I find that Mary's room works for some and not for others. It's just, for me, it's a helpful way to, especially when someone's not thought a ton about it before, because sometimes people just sort of say to me, well, like, you know, why can't consciousness just be brain activity? And it's like, it's kind of difficult to know where to begin. And it's like, well, let's just begin with this thought at least, that there's something else going on. You know, there's the experience and then there's the physical stuff. And if you knew everything about blue, it seems weird to say that you know everything about blue except what blue looks like. In fact, like the person who only has experienced blue but doesn't know anything about wavelengths and particle physics and the biology of the eye, I think a lot of people would say that they have a better apprehension of the true nature of blue than the opposite, than the person who has all of the other stuff but doesn't have the experience. I think intuitively most people want to say like, no, but you don't know blue unless you've seen it. And just seeing blue is enough on its own to say that you understand what blue is. Because otherwise you're talking about wavelengths and particle physics, which is not the same thing as blueness.
Sure.
And so I am still pretty attracted to that line of thought. I think it works. I get what Sean Carroll's saying, which is that you could just know that this particular physical activity produces this kind of experience. It just isn't being produced in that moment. That's fair enough, but this is just the problem of mapping on information to experience. And I think if you've got a strong enough intuition going into the experiment, you'll keep it by the end. But I think it finds most use in helping you to work out what you do think. Because you might come away from Mary's room thinking, oh, I don't really see that as a problem. Cool, then great. Maybe you'll make a great physicalist. But if you do see it as a problem, think about why. It's kind of a litmus test.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, the physicalist can deny that she doesn't gain new information and has to deny that. But I mean, I think Sean hasn't. You've got to at least take that on. You've got to take that on head to head. That the intuition that she gains new information, new knowledge, and deny that. And when Sean talks about it, he just says, "Oh, well, she wouldn't have had the experience." Yeah. Everyone agrees that, but you've got to confront head on. How can you say she doesn't gain new information? And the physicalists have different ways of doing that. So David Lewis said she gains know-how, not know that, not knowledge that. She gains new abilities. Many physicalists say she gains new concepts, new ways of carving up the physical information. So, Daniel Dennett was just the most, uncompromising. He says, no. She would already know. She'd say, oh yeah, I know what red's like. She wouldn't gain anything. Right. But most physicalists will say she gains something, but it's not quite information. It's not quite new knowledge in the relevant sense. So that's what Sean and Patricia Church had never dealt with. I mean, here's just one way of just pressing the intuition that she does gain new information. I've got a paper on this called Curiosity and the Knowledge Argument, that she might be curious, right? Before she's never seen red. So like, oh, I wonder what it's like. And then she sees red, she goes, that's what it's like. And her curiosity is satisfied. I mean, that seems to strongly suggest she's gaining new information. If your curiosity is satisfied.
Right? Like, call it information or call it something else. There's something else in the world that is not reducible to mathematical explanation. Let's just put it that way. And I think that's kind of uncontroversially true. And then the question is like, well, why not? If maths is the language of the universe, why can it not capture whatever this thing is? Call it experience, call it information, call it whatever the hell you want, call it the satisfaction of curiosity. Why can that not be fully approximated by the language of mathematics? It's like having a word that's not translatable into a different language. If you claim you've got this master language, which can explain all human concepts, but it doesn't have an appropriate translation of a really important word, then you've got an incomplete language, you know?
I think what we've learned today, Alex, is we very much agree on consciousness and we very much disagree on metaethics, which is
true.
Wonderful part
At
of
least for
the
now, you know.
richness of life. Well, we both might change our minds either way. You might persuade me on the. At some point, maybe we're both running out of energy now. At some point, I would like to hear about your views and combination. I guess when in between doing podcasts, you've said a little bit, and it sounds really fascinating and novel and interesting how you're thinking of approaching the combination problem.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear about that sometime.
Perhaps we can speak again and really go into the depths. And I hate to relegate that to a tired addendum to an otherwise quite intense conversation. But
I think I'm needing a nap now. But yes, I would I would love to hear about that. Well, thank you very much for joining me here, having a lovely chat. We've really gone into depth on a very particular issue in a huge amount of depth, and probably people will be finding it either really wonderful, insightful, or just what the fuck are they talking about? Going on about this for 2 hours.
Well, let us know
anyway,
down in the
I
comments.
enjoyed it. Let us know. Thanks for joining. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Thank you for listening. If you've got any questions about what you've just heard, subscribe to my Substack and I'll try and answer them in this month's Ask Me Anything video. Questions from paid subscribers get priority. Finally, if you want to see me in conversation with William Lane Craig, Jessica Fraser and Joe Foley at the Royal Institution Theatre in London on the 1st of May, click on the link below. It is going to be wild, I'll tell you.